The wind in the Montana Territory did not just blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of 3 dry counties and the memory of a winter that had refused to end until it had killed half the calves in the basin. Now, in the late summer of 1885, the land was a breathless, sun-bleached skeleton of what it had once been. The dirt was cracked into patterns like old china, and the creek beds were nothing but stones and dust, waiting for rain that the sky seemed too cruel to give. Elias Thorne stood by the south fence of the Double Bar Ranch, his gloved hand resting on a cedar post that was graying under the relentless sun. He was a man built of the same hard material as the landscape, weathered and worn down by time, yet standing upright simply because he did not know how to fall. He was 62 years old, though the mirror in his bedroom told him he looked 80. His knuckles were swollen knots of arthritis that ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, predicting the weather better than any barometer. He shifted his weight, wincing as the old bullet wound in his right hip caught fire. It was a souvenir from a cattle rustler back in '69, a nagging reminder that he had survived things that should have killed him. He watched his herd, what was left of it. The cattle were thin, their ribs showing like the rungs of a ladder through their dusty hides. They huddled in the shade of a lone cottonwood, too lethargic to flick away the flies. There was a time when this valley had been lush, when the house behind him had been filled with the smell of baking bread and the sound of a boy's laughter. But Sarah had been in the ground for 10 years now, taken by a fever that burned through her faster than a prairie fire. And Jacob, their son, had followed her 2 years later, trampled in a stampede that never should have happened. Now, there was only Elias and the silence. The silence was louder than the wind. He climbed onto his horse, a roan mare named Bess, who was getting as long in the tooth as he was, and turned her head toward town. He needed supplies, and he needed to visit the bank, a chore he dreaded more than branding season. As he rode into the town of Bitter Creek, he felt the eyes on him. It was a small settlement, a collection of false-fronted buildings clinging to the edge of civilization, where privacy was a luxury no one could afford. To the men sitting on the porch of the livery stable, Elias was a fixture, a relic. There goes old man Thorne. One man spat into the dust, too stubborn to die. He ought to sell that land, another replied, keeping his voice low but not low enough. He is too old to work it. He does not know when to quit. Elias stared straight ahead, his hat pulled low. He heard them. He always heard them. They thought he was deaf or senile, but his hearing was sharp enough to catch the pity in their voices, which was worse than their scorn. He tied Bess to the rail outside the general store and slapped the dust from his coat. Though it was a futile gesture, the dust was part of him now. Across the street, the midday stagecoach had just rattled to a halt, kicking up a cloud of red dirt that hung in the stagnant air. The driver shouted at the horses, and the door swung open. A few travelers stepped out, men mostly, looking to wet their throats at the saloon. But then a woman emerged, and the street seemed to quiet down, just for a moment. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, though her eyes held a weariness that belonged to a woman twice her age. Her dress was plain, a faded blue cotton that had been washed until it was thin, and she clutched a small bundle of belongings to her chest as if she expected someone to snatch it away. This was Lily. Lily Harper stood on the wooden boardwalk, feeling the board shift under her worn boots. She felt exposed. The sun was brighter here than it had been in the place she had fled, a mining town 3 days south where the shadows were long and the men were cruel. She touched the pocket of her skirt, feeling the crinkle of the letter hidden there. It was from a woman named Rose, a friend who had died helping Lily get onto that stagecoach. The letter was not addressed to anyone. It was just a piece of paper that Rose had pressed into her hand, saying it was the deed to her own soul, a reminder that she belonged to no man. Lily took a breath, tasting the dry sage in the air. She needed work. Her coin purse held exactly $3.40. That would not buy her safety for long. She walked toward the hotel first, her head high, trying to summon the dignity she had fought so hard to keep. The clerk looked up as she entered, his smile professional until his eyes swept over her. He saw the fraying cuffs of her sleeves, the roughness of her hands, and the faint, pale scars that circled her wrists like bracelets, marks left by a stepfather who had believed in binding what he wanted to keep. "We have no work for a chambermaid," the clerk said flatly, before she had even finished her sentence. "I am a hard worker, sir," Lily said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her knees. "I can scrub, I can cook, and I can mend." The clerk looked past her, dismissing her. "We are a respectable establishment. Miss, we have to be careful about the sort of people we employ." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Lily turned and walked out, her face burning. It was the same at the restaurant, and the same at the boarding house. They looked at her, saw a young woman traveling alone with no ring on her finger and fear in her eyes, and they assumed the worst. They assumed she was a woman of the night looking to ply a trade, or a runaway wife, or simply damaged goods. In their eyes, she was trouble. By the time she reached the general store, her hope was fraying. She needed water, and perhaps a bit of cheese to tide her over. She stepped inside the dim, cool interior of the store, blinking against the sudden darkness. 2 men were standing by the counter, laughing loudly at something the storekeeper, Mr. Gable, had said. They stopped when Lily entered. One of them, a thick-necked man with tobacco stains on his beard, looked her up and down with a grin that made Lily's skin crawl. "Well now, look what the wind blew in," the man said, nudging his companion. "You looking for company, sweetheart?" Lily ignored him, moving toward the counter. "I just need a wedge of cheddar and an apple, please." The storekeeper hesitated, glancing at the men. He did not want a scene. "That will be 10 cents, he said shortly. The man with the beard stepped closer, blocking Lily's path to the door. "I asked you a question. Girl, you look like you have come from a long way off. Maybe you need a warm bed. I have got a room above the saloon." "I am not interested," Lily said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Please let me pass. You are too pretty to be so unfriendly," the man sneered, reaching out to catch her arm. Lily flinched, dropping her small bundle. It hit the floor with a thud, spilling a spare apron and a hairbrush. She scrambled to pick them up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She heard the men laughing, a low, ugly sound. "Leave her be, Silas." The voice was low, graveled, and sharp enough to cut through the humidity of the room. Elias Thorne stepped out from the back aisle, a sack of flour on one shoulder. He set the sack down on the counter with a heavy thump and turned his gaze on the man named Silas. Silas straightened up, his grin fading. "This is none of your business, old man. A woman trying to buy an apple is no business of yours, either," Elias said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. There was a stillness to him, a dangerous quiet that reminded men of a rattlesnake coiled in the shade. Elias might have been old, and he might have been crippled in the hip, but he had eyes that had seen men die, and he looked at Silas as if he were already measuring him for a pine box. Silas spat on the floor, close to Lily's boot, but he stepped back. "She is just a stray. Thorne, probably carrying disease. Get out," Elias said. Silas muttered a curse, signaled to his friend, and they brushed past Lily, shoving the door open so hard the bell jangled violently. The silence that followed was heavy. The storekeeper, Mr. Gable, cleared his throat nervously. "I'm sorry about that. Elias, you know how the boys get." Elias ignored him. He looked down at Lily. She was kneeling on the floor, clutching her hairbrush, her knuckles white. She looked up at him, and for a second, the years fell away from Elias. He saw the same look in her eyes that he had seen in a doe caught in a barbed wire fence, terrified, exhausted, but waiting for the final blow without whimpering. It reminded him of Sarah, the way she had looked at the end, fighting a battle she could not win. "Here," Elias said, extending a hand. Lily stared at the hand. It was large, calloused, the skin spotted with age and scarred from a lifetime of labor. It was a hand that could crush or steady. She hesitated. She had learned that men's hands were usually weapons. But the old rancher's eyes were not predatory. They were tired. She took his hand. He pulled her to her feet with a surprising strength. Yet he released her instantly, as if wary of frightening her further. "Are you unharmed?" Elias asked. "Yes, sir," Lily said. Her voice was barely audible. "Thank you." She turned to the counter, placing a dime on the wood with trembling fingers. "Just the apple. Please, Mr. Gable took the coin, his nose wrinkling slightly. "You best be moving on. Miss, we do not want trouble here, and it seems you carry it with you like a scent." Lily took the apple, her face burning with shame. She turned to leave. "Head down." "Wait," Elias said. Lily stopped, her hand on the door latch. Elias looked at Mr. Gable, then at Lily. He saw the dust on her dress, the thinness of her arms. He saw a woman who had nowhere to go and nothing to lose. He thought of his empty house, the dust settling on the furniture, the silence that greeted him every night. He told himself he needed a housekeeper. He told himself his hip was getting too bad to manage the cooking and the cleaning alone. He did not tell himself that he was lonely. "I have a ranch about 2 hours' ride north of here," Elias said, his voice gruff. "It is a big place, too big for one man to keep decent. I need a housekeeper, someone to cook, clean, and mend." Lily turned slowly. She studied him. He was old, easily old enough to be her father, perhaps her grandfather. His face was a map of deep lines, and his mustache was gray. But he stood straight, and he had not looked at her chest or her hips. He had looked her in the eye. "I cannot pay much," Elias continued, feeling foolish. "Room and board, and $2 a week. It is honest work, Mr. Gable leaned over the counter. "Elias, use your head. You do not know this girl. She could be a thief, or worse." Elias did not look at the storekeeper. He kept his eyes on Lily. "I'm offering a job. Miss, if you want it." Lily's mind raced. $2 a week, a roof, food, safety. But she knew the rumors that would start. An old man and a young woman, alone on a ranch miles from town. She knew what people would say. She knew what they were already thinking. But then she remembered Silas's hand reaching for her. She remembered the clerk's sneer. She looked at the scars on her wrists. Dignity was a luxury for the rich. Survival was all she had left. "I work hard," Lily said, her chin lifting slightly. "I am not afraid of dirt." Elias nodded once. "Then fetch your things. My wagon is out front." The ride out of town was excruciatingly silent. Elias sat on the bench seat, the reins loose in his hands, guiding the horses with subtle clicks of his tongue. Lily sat on the far side of the bench, leaving a foot of space between them. She held her bundle in her lap, her knuckles white. The landscape rolled by, vast and indifferent. The scrub brush was brown and brittle, and the hills rose up like the backs of sleeping giants. To the west, the sky was turning a bruised purple, heavy clouds piling up against the mountains. The air felt electric, the way it did before a storm broke the heat. Elias cleared his throat after the first hour. It sounded loud in the quiet. "My name is Elias Thorne. Lily Harper," she replied, not looking at him. "There is a storm coming," Elias said, looking at the sky. "We should make it before the rain starts, if the road holds." "Yes, sir." The conversation died there, withered by the awkwardness. Elias felt a sudden surge of doubt. What had he done? He was a widower, a man of standing, however faded. Bringing a strange girl into his home? Mr. Gable was right. It looked bad. It looked desperate. He glanced sideways at her. She was staring at the horizon, her profile sharp and pale. She looked breakable. But then he saw her jaw set, the way she braced herself against the swaying of the wagon without reaching for him or the rail. She was holding herself together with nothing but will. "You do not have to worry." "Miss Harper," Elias said suddenly, his voice rough. I am not looking for a wife, or anything else. I just need help with the house." Lily turned to him then, her eyes wide. She searched his face. looking for the lie. She had heard promises before. Her stepfather had promised he only wanted to be a father to her. The man at the brothel in the last town had promised he would protect her. Lies were the language men spoke best, but Elias's face was open, craggy and honest as a rock face. "I am here to work, Mr. Thorne," she said softly. "That is all?" "Good," Elias said. He turned his attention back to the horses. "That is good." They arrived at the ranch just as the first drops of rain began to spit from the sky, hitting the dried dust with little puffs of impact. The double-bar ranch house was a sprawling single-story structure made of logs that had turned silver with age. It had a wide porch that wrapped around two sides, and a stone chimney that looked like it had grown out of the earth. But as they drew closer, Lily saw the neglect. Weeds grew tall around the porch steps. A shutter hung crookedly from one hinge. The yard was littered with old rusted tools and bits of wire. It was a place that was slowly forgetting how to be a home. Elias halted the wagon and climbed down, his legs stiff. He grunted as his boots hit the ground, but he waved away Lily's instinctive movement to help him. "Go on inside," he said. "Unhitching the horses. The door is unlocked. It is never locked." Lily climbed the steps, the wood groaning under her weight. She pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The air inside was stale and hot. It smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and dust. Shafts of light cut through the gloom from the windows, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the air. Lily set her bundle down on a table near the door and looked around. It was a masculine space, cluttered and utilitarian. But as she walked deeper into the room, she saw the ghosts. A sewing basket sat on a side table, the yarn inside covered in a thick layer of gray dust. On the mantelpiece, there was a daguerreotype of a woman with a kind smile, her hair pulled back in a ribbon. Next to it lay a faded blue hair ribbon, untouched for years. Lily reached out and touched the ribbon. It felt silky and sad. This had been a home once. Love had lived here. Now, only the husk remained. She heard the heavy thump of Elias's boots on the porch. Panic flared in her chest, the instinct to run, to hide. She forced it down. She took off her hat and placed it on the table. She rolled up her sleeves. By the time Elias came inside, shaking the rain from his hat, Lily had already found a broom. She was sweeping the main room, her movements efficient and fierce. She was attacking the dust as if it were a personal enemy. Elias stopped in the doorway, watching her. The sound of the broom against the floorboards was a sound he had not heard in a decade. It sounded like life. He watched the curve of her back, the determination in her shoulders. For a moment, just a heartbeat, he felt a strange ache in the center of his chest, not his heart, but something deeper, something he thought had withered away. He scolded himself immediately. "She is a child," he thought. "You are an old fool. She is here because she has nowhere else, not because she wants to be. I will show you to your room," Elias said, his voice low and rough. He led her down the hallway. He pointed to a door on the left. That is the guest room. The sheets might be musty. I have not changed them in a long time." "Thank you," Lily said. "My room is at the end of the hall," Elias said, pointing to the far door. "The kitchen is through there. Supper is usually beans and salt pork. I am not much of a cook." "I will cook," Lily said, "starting tomorrow." They stood there in the hallway, the silence stretching between them again. The rain was falling harder now, drumming a steady rhythm on the roof. "Good night, Miss Harper," Elias said. "Good night, Mr. Thorne." Lily went into her room and closed the door. She did not lock it. There was no lock, but she dragged a heavy wooden chair and wedged it under the doorknob. It was a habit she could not break. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sagging under her. The room was simple: a bed, a washstand, a window looking out over the dark hills. She listened to the house. She heard Elias's heavy footsteps retreat down the hall. She heard his door close. She lay down, fully clothed, staring up at the dark ceiling. She was safe. For tonight, she was safe. But she wondered about the old man. He seemed decent, but she knew that decency could curdle into entitlement when a man was lonely enough. She gripped the handle of a small knife she kept in her boot, her fingers tracing the cold metal. She prayed she would not have to use it. She prayed this place could be different. Down the hall, Elias lay in his own bed, listening to the rain. His hip throbbed, a dull fire that radiated down his leg. He stared at the empty pillow beside him. He felt a profound sense of shame. He had brought a young woman into this house of ghosts. He had exposed her to the town's malice and tied her fate to his failing ranch. It was selfish. He knew it was selfish. He wanted to hear footsteps in the hall. He wanted to see a light in the window when he came in from the dark. "You are too old for this," he whispered to the dark. "You are too old to want anything." But as he closed his eyes, he could still see her face in the dusty light of the general store, haunted, fierce, and beautiful in a way that made his old heart stumble. He pulled the quilt up to his chin, listening to the wind howl around the corners of the house, a lonely sound that suddenly felt a little less absolute. The weeks that followed bled into one another, marked not by the calendar on the wall, but by the slow, grinding turn of the season. September burned itself out, leaving behind a landscape that was brittle and thirsty. The Montana wind, which had seemed merely restless before, turned predatory. It hunted for cracks in the log walls of the ranch house, whistling through the chinking to deposit fine drifts of gray silt on the windowsill, the table, and the freshly washed linens. Lily Harper learned quickly that the dust was not something one cleaned away. It was something one fought, a war of attrition that could never be truly won. She woke every morning before the sun had crested the eastern ridges, the floorboards cold against her bare feet. The first task was always the stove. She learned to coax the embers from the night before into a roaring fire, feeding it split cedar and dried cow chips until the iron belly of the stove radiated enough heat to boil coffee. Water was the next battle. The pump near the house had gone dry 2 years ago, Elias had told her, his voice devoid of apology, just stating the hard fact of the drought. That meant she had to walk 1/4 of a mile to the windmill near the creek bed, carrying 2 galvanized buckets that banged against her shins. At first, the weight had made her arms tremble so badly she had spilled half the water on the walk back, weeping tears of frustration that dried instantly in the arid air. Now, 6 weeks in, her shoulders had hardened. She carried the water with a grim determination. Ignoring the way the wire handles bit into her palms, the landscape was a harsh tutor. The grass was not the soft green carpet of the storybooks. It was yellow, sharp, and hard as wire. It slashed at her ankles through her skirts when she walked out to hang the laundry. The coyotes were not distant shadows, but bold neighbors, their yips and howls echoing off the canyon walls at night, sounding like the laughter of madmen. Elias watched her. He watched her from the porch as he mended a bridle. His eyes narrowed against the sun. He saw the way she stopped flinching at the sound of the wind. He saw the way her hands, once soft and pale, were becoming brown and rough, mapped with small cuts and burns from the stove. She never complained. Not once. When the stew was thin because the supplies were low, she ate less so he could eat more. When the dust coated her hair so thickly, it felt like straw. She simply brushed it out by the firelight, her face set in a mask of endurance. He began to take her out with him. It started as a necessity. He needed someone to hold the wire while he stapled it to the posts, but it became a ritual. He taught her to ride Bess, the old mare, while he took the gelding. "Rusty, keep your heels down," Elias instructed, his voice gruff as they rode along the perimeter of the south pasture. "Do not pull on her mouth. She is not a plow horse. You have to ask her, not tell her." Lily adjusted her seat, feeling the rolling gait of the horse beneath her. Like this? Elias watched the way her back straightened, the natural grace she found in the saddle. She looked capable. She looked strong. For a moment, the image of her, framed against the vast, empty sky, wisps of dark hair escaping her bonnet, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He felt a stirring in his chest, a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. "Better," he said. looking away quickly to stare at a hawk circling overhead. "You are learning." He hated himself for looking. He was 62 years old, a man whose body was a catalog of failures. The stiff hip, the aching knuckles, the heart that sometimes fluttered like a trapped bird. She was 24, with a life that, despite its scars, was still ahead of her. He had no right to notice the curve of her neck or the way her eyes lit up when she managed to throw a loop of rope over a fence post. It was shameful. It was the sort of thing the men in town whispered about, the lecherous hunger of a senile fool. But the town was already whispering. It began as a low murmur, the kind that stops when a door is opened. But it grew bolder when Elias and Lily rode the wagon into Bitter Creek for their monthly supplies. The atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer just the men at the livery stable. It was the women. Lily walked beside Elias down the boardwalk, carrying a basket for eggs. She kept her head high, but her eyes were darting nervously. As they passed the milliner's shop, Mrs. Gable and the preacher's wife, Mrs. Higgins, were standing outside, adjusting their shawls. They stopped talking as Lily approached. They did not move out of the way. "Good morning," Lily said, her voice tight. "Mrs." Higgins looked Lily up and down, her gaze lingering on the hem of Lily's skirt, which was dusty from the ride. She sniffed, a sharp, distinct sound of disapproval. "The Lord sees all things, Mrs." Higgins said to the air, not looking at Lily but through her. "There is no roof thick enough to hide sin under the Lord's sky." "Mrs." Gable leaned in, whispering loud enough to be heard, "living out there alone with him, and him a widower. It is unnatural. They say she came from a house of ill repute." "Mrs." Higgins added, her voice dropping to a theatrical hush. "It is no wonder she found her way to a bachelor's bed. Birds of a feather." Lily froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and sickly. She felt the old shame rising up, a black tide that threatened to drown her. They knew, or they guessed. It did not matter. To them, she was already ruined. She was dirty. "Come along, Lily." Elias's voice was like a whip crack. He had stopped a few paces ahead, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip, not threatening, just present. He was looking at the women with eyes like flint. "We have work to do," he said, "and the air here is getting stale." He ushered her past them, but the damage was done. Lily walked mechanically, her vision blurred. She heard the snickers of men as they passed the saloon, the crude speculation about how the old man was managing to keep a young filly happy. Every laugh felt like a stone thrown at her. The ride back to the ranch was silent, but it was a different silence than before. It was heavy, suffocating. Lily sat with her hands clenched in her lap, staring at her boots. She felt Elias glancing at her, but she could not meet his eyes. If she looked at him, she would shatter. When they reached the ranch, she unloaded the supplies in a frenzy of activity, putting the flour and coffee away with shaking hands. Elias went to the barn to unhitch the team. An hour later, he found her. She was in the tack room of the barn. She was supposed to be oiling the saddles, but she was huddled in the corner, sitting on a bale of hay, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking with silent, racking sobs that seemed to tear themselves out of her throat. Elias stood in the doorway, the scent of hay and horse sweat around him. He felt helpless. He could wrestle a steer to the ground. He could ride through a blizzard. But a woman's tears terrified him. He took a step forward, his boots crunching on the straw. "Lily," he said softly. She flinched violently, her head snapping up. Her face was streaked with tears and dust, her eyes red-rimmed and wild. "I am sorry," she gasped, wiping at her face with her apron. "I am sorry, Mr. Thorne. I will get back to work." "Stop," Elias said. He moved closer, his bad leg dragging slightly. "Stop working. Tell me what is wrong." "It is nothing," she lied, her voice cracking. "It is just the dust." "Do not lie to me," Elias said gently. "Is it what those hens said in town?" Lily let out a ragged breath, and then it all came spilling out. "It is true, is it not? In their eyes, it is true. I am stained. It does not matter how hard I work. It does not matter that I sleep in the guest room with a chair under the knob. They look at me, and they see They see filth. She looked at her hands, scrubbing at them as if she could wash away the past. I was sold. Elias, my stepfather sold me to pay a debt. I did what I had to do to survive, and now I am dragging you down with me. They are laughing at you because of me. Elias felt a cold fury rise in his gut, directed not at her, but at the world that had broken her. He closed the distance between them. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second, trembling slightly, before he placed it on her shoulder. His hand was heavy, warm, and rough. Through the thin cotton of her dress, the heat of his palm seared her skin. It was not a grabbing touch. It was an anchor. "You listen to me, Lily Harper," Elias said, his voice low and rumbling. "People in that town have small minds and smaller hearts. They do not know you. I know you." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "I see a woman who works until her hands bleed. I see a woman who has more courage in her little finger than that preacher's wife has in her whole body. You are not dirty. Lily, you are a survivor, and there is no shame in surviving." Lily looked up at him, her breath hitching. She saw the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the raw honesty. For the first time in her life, a man was touching her not to take, but to give. The sensation was electric. It traveled down her spine, settling in the pit of her stomach as a confusing, aching warmth. She leaned into his touch, just an inch, instinctively seeking the comfort he offered. Elias felt the movement. He felt the heat of her body radiating toward him. The smell of her, soap, lavender water, and honest sweat, filled his head. For a heartbeat. The air in the barn grew thin, the space between them charged with something unspoken, something that terrified Elias as much as it pulled at him. He pulled his hand away abruptly, clearing his throat and stepping back. "Supper," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "We need supper." He turned and walked out of the barn without looking back, leaving Lily sitting on the hay, her shoulder still burning where he had touched her. That night, the weather broke. It started with an unnatural stillness, the wind dying down until the silence was deafening. Then, the sky split open. A thunderstorm of biblical proportions slammed into the valley. Thunder shook the log walls of the house, rattling the dishes in the cupboard. Lightning flashed in rapid staccato bursts, illuminating the world in stark, blue-white flashes. Elias was pacing the main room, watching the window. "The creek," he muttered. "The herd is in the low pasture near the creek. If it floods..." He grabbed his oilskin coat from the peg near the door. "I have to go out. I have to open the gate to the upper ridge so they can climb." Lily was at his side in an instant, grabbing his arm. "Elias, no! Look at it! It is a deluge! You cannot ride in this! I cannot lose the herd! Lily!" he snapped, the stress fraying his temper. "That herd is the only thing keeping the bank from taking this roof over your head." He jammed his hat onto his head and pushed out into the storm. Lily watched him from the window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. She saw him struggle to mount Rusty in the driving rain, the horse tossing its head, spooked by the thunder. She watched him disappear into the wall of water and darkness, and she felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her chest. She waited. The minutes stretched into hours. She paced the floor, wringing her hands. She kept the coffee pot hot. She lit a lamp and set it in the window, a beacon in the chaos. Midnight came and went. The rain did not let up. Then she heard it, not the sound of hooves, but a heavy thud on the porch steps, followed by a groan. Lily threw the door open. Elias was lying on the wet planks, dragging himself toward the door. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes plastered to his shivering body. His hat was gone. Blood was mixing with the rain on his forehead. "Elias!" She rushed to him, grabbing him under the arms. He was heavy, dead weight, but adrenaline gave her strength she did not know she possessed. She hauled him across the threshold, grunting with the effort, and kicked the door shut against the wind. He collapsed onto the rug in front of the fire, gasping for air. His face was gray, his lips blue. "My leg," he gritted out. "Rusty. Lightning struck a tree. He reared." "Hush," Lily commanded. She fell to her knees beside him. His shirt was torn, and there was a dark, oozing gash across his chest where he must have fallen onto a rock or a branch. His bad leg was twisted at an awkward angle, though not broken, just wrenched. She worked frantically. She ran to the kitchen, grabbing a bowl of water, clean rags, and a bottle of whiskey. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she began to unbutton his sodden shirt. The buttons were slippery with rain and blood. In her haste, she tore the fabric, peeling the wet cotton away from his skin. Elias lay back, his eyes half closed, watching her. The pain was a roar in his hip and chest, but through the haze, he was acutely aware of her. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in damp tendrils around her face. Her eyes were wide with panic and care. She dipped a rag in the water and began to clean the gash on his chest. Her fingers were gentle, incredibly gentle, as she wiped away the mud and blood. As she worked, she exposed the history written on his body, the puckered scar of the old bullet wound on his hip, the long white slash on his ribs from a knife fight 30 years ago, the sun-weathered skin of his neck contrasting with the paler skin of his chest. "This is going to sting," she whispered. She poured a little whiskey onto the wound. Elias hissed, his back arching off the floor, his hands shooting out to grip her wrist. "I am sorry. I am sorry," she murmured, her other hand coming up to soothe his forehead, brushing the wet gray hair back. The pain subsided to a dull throb. Elias did not let go of her wrist. He lay there, breathing hard, looking up at her. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating a small, intimate world that contained only the two of them. Lily froze, realizing his hand was still wrapped around her wrist. She looked down at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, trembling vulnerability. She was kneeling between his legs, her hands on his bare chest. The intimacy of it hit her like a wave. She could feel the beat of his heart under her palm, steady and strong despite his age. Elias looked at her. He saw the water droplets on her eyelashes. He saw the fear in her eyes shifting into something else, relief, concern, and beneath that, a yearning that mirrored his own. "You came back," she whispered. I thought the storm took you." "It tried," Elias rasped. His thumb moved against the delicate skin of her inner wrist, feeling her pulse fluttering like a hummingbird's wings. The silence in the room deepened, heavier than the storm outside. The air grew thick. Lily did not pull away. She leaned closer, drawn by a gravity she could not name. She looked at his mouth. It was a stern mouth, hidden beneath his mustache, but she wondered what it would feel like. She wondered if his roughness would smooth out if she kissed him. She wanted him to pull her down. She wanted to hide in his strength. She wanted to forget that she was Lily Harper, the ruined girl, and just be a woman held by a man. Elias saw it. He saw the invitation in her eyes, the slight parting of her lips. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to reach up, to pull her into him, to taste the life she offered. He wanted it more than he had wanted anything in 20 years. He started to lift his head, his eyes locking on hers. Their faces were inches apart. She could smell the rain and the whiskey and the man. Then, the shutter outside banged against the wall, a sharp report like a gunshot. Elias flinched, the spell shattered. Reality rushed back in, cold, hard, and unforgiving. He was an old man lying on the floor. She was a young woman who had been abused by men who took what they wanted. If he touched her now, in her fear and gratitude, he would be no better than them. He would be taking advantage of a moment of weakness. He released her wrist and turned his face toward the fire, closing his eyes tight. "No," he whispered harshly. Lily stayed frozen, her heart pounding. "What? You are just scared." "Lily," Elias said, his voice grating like stone on stone. "And I am. I am too old for such foolishness. Help me up." The rejection stung worse than a slap. Lily sat back on her heels, her face burning. She felt a sudden, crushing humiliation. She had offered herself, in a way, and he had turned away. She felt foolish. She felt cheap, but as she looked at his profile, rigid with control, She realized he was not trembling from the cold. He was trembling from the effort of not touching her. She stood up, her legs shaking. I will help you to your bed." They moved in a clumsy dance, Lily supporting his weight as he hobbled down the hall. At his door, he leaned against the frame, not looking at her. "Thank you," he said, "for the tending." Lily nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good night, Elias." She retreated to her room and closed the door. She did not wedge the chair under the knob tonight. She sat on the bed, hugging her knees to her chest, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. Her heart was aching with a confused, battering rhythm. She should be relieved. He had proven he was decent. He had proven he was safe. But as she touched her own wrist where his hand had been, she felt a hollow ache in her chest. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she hadn't just wanted him to kiss her because she was scared. She had wanted it because when he looked at her, she didn't feel dirty. She felt precious, and the fact that he had stopped. Somehow, that made her want him even more. It made the safety feel dangerous, and the danger feel like the only place she wanted to be. The days that followed the storm brought a stillness to the double-bar ranch that was deceptive. The air was clear, scrubbed clean by the deluge, and the creek ran high and muddy for 3 days before settling back into its rocky bed. But inside the house, the atmosphere had thickened. The easy, practical distance that had existed between Elias and Lily was gone, replaced by a tension that hummed like a telegraph wire in a high wind. They moved around each other with a new, hyper-aware caution. In the kitchen, when Lily passed a plate of biscuits to Elias, her fingers grazed the back of his hand, and the contact seemed to echo through the room louder than the crack of a log in the fire. He would pull his hand back a fraction too quickly. She would turn to the stove to hide the flush rising on her neck. During the long evenings, they sat in the main room, Elias mending tack by the light of the oil lamp, Lily darning socks or reading from a tattered book of poetry she had found on the shelf. Their eyes met often, brief collisions of gazes that were quickly averted. He would watch her when she was not looking, studying the way the firelight caught the curve of her cheek, the strength in her hands as she worked the needle. She would watch him, noting the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the silver in his beard, the sheer, solid presence of him. It was on one of these quiet evenings, with the wind sighing around the eaves, that the silence finally broke. Elias set down the bridle he was oiling. He looked at the daguerreotype on the mantel, the image of the woman with the ribbon. Her name was Sarah. He said. His voice was low, rasping slightly from disuse. Lily looked up, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "I know, you said her name once. In your sleep. She was the only woman I ever looked at," Elias continued. Not turning his head, "We built this place together. She stripped logs with me. She shot a wolf that was after the chickens from the porch steps. She was stronger than me." He rubbed his bad hip unconsciously. The fever took her in 75. It was a dry year, like this one. The doctor said it was typhoid, but I think she just worked herself into the ground trying to keep us afloat. And Jacob, my boy, he was 20. He had her eyes. He died 2 years later over a dispute about water rights with a neighbor. A foolish argument. A gun was drawn. A horse panicked. He looked at his hands, scarred and swollen. I failed them both. A man is supposed to protect his own. I buried them both on that hill behind the barn. Sometimes, I think I am just a ghost, haunting my own life, waiting for the ground to open up and take me too. Lily set her sewing down. She moved to the chair opposite him, leaning forward. The firelight cast deep shadows in the hollows of her face. "You did not fail them, Elias," she said softly. "You survived them. That is the hardest thing to do." Elias looked at her then, his eyes wet and unguarded. "And what about you, Lily? Who did you survive?" The question hung in the air. Lily looked at the flames, her hands twisting in her lap. She had carried her secret like a stone in her gut, a weight that made it hard to breathe. But looking at Elias, seeing the raw honesty in his face, she felt the stone shift. "My stepfather," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "His name was Silas. Just like that man in the store. He was a gambler. He was not a good one. When my mother died, he said I had to earn my keep. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking dryly. He did not mean scrubbing floors. When I was 16, he started bringing men to the house. He owed money to people. He told me it was my duty, that if I did not do it, they would kill us both. She looked up, tears streaming silently down her face. He sold me, Elias, night after night, and when the debts were paid, he realized he liked the money, so he kept doing it. I ran away 3 times. He always found me. The last time, I ended up in a house in Silver City. It was organized there, but it was the same. Men paying for a body that did not belong to them. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. That is why I cannot stand sudden touches. That is why I feel stained. It does not matter how much I wash. I feel like I'm still in that room. Elias sat perfectly still. His face had gone rigid, the lines around his mouth deepening into canyons. A cold, terrifying fury was rising in him, a rage so white-hot it made his vision blur. He was not angry at her. He was angry at a world that could take something as bright and brave as Lily and try to grind her into the mud. He stood up, ignoring the pain in his joints. He crossed the small distance between them and knelt before her chair. It was a struggle for him to get down, but he did not care. He took her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. "Look at me, Lily." She shook her head, shame burning her cheeks. "Look at me," he commanded gently. She raised her eyes. "You listen to me," he said, his voice shaking with the intensity of his conviction. "You are not stained. Do you hear me? You are not dirty. Those men, they were the animals. They were the filth. You did what you had to do to stay alive. That takes a strength that most men, including me, will never know." He squeezed her hands, his rough palm scraping against her skin. "Nothing that happened to you changes who you are. You are the woman who saved my life in the storm. You are the woman who works until she drops. You are worthy of respect. You are worthy of kindness. And you are worthy of love." Lily stared at him, her breath hitching in a sob. His words were like a key turning in a rusted lock. She had spent years building walls of shame to keep the world out, and he was dismantling them with simple, rough-hewn truth. "You really believe that?" she whispered. "I know it," Elias said. "As sure as I know the sun rises." He stood up slowly, groaning slightly, and placed a hand on her head. A benediction. "Now, dry your eyes. We have cattle to check in the morning." The emotional dam had broken, but the world outside the ranch did not care about their healing. The next week brought a buggy rolling up the long, dusty drive. It was a sleek, black vehicle, pulled by 2 high-stepping bays that looked too fine for the rough country. The man who stepped out was dressed in a tailored suit, his boots polished to a shine that reflected the harsh sun. It was Mr. Harrow's foreman, a man named Griggs, who wore a smile that did not reach his eyes. Elias met him on the porch, a rifle leaning casually against the wall next to him. Lily stood in the doorway, drying her hands on her apron, watching. "Morning, Thorne," Griggs said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mr. Harrow sends his regards." "I bet he does," Elias said, not moving. "What does he want?" Griggs pulled a cigar from his pocket, taking his time to light it. "He wants to make you an offer. Again, the railroad is coming through Thorne, 20 miles north, but the spurs will come south. Your land, it sits right where the water is. Mr. Harrow is willing to offer you $3,000 for the deed. That is a generous price for a failing operation." "My operation is none of your concern," Elias said. "And the land is not for sale, not for $3,000, not for $30,000. Griggs sighed, blowing smoke into the clean air. "Be reasonable, old man. You are past your prime. You have got no heir, just you and, well, your help." Griggs' eyes flicked to Lily, his gaze stripping her down. A nasty smirk curled his lip. "Pretty thing. Expensive to keep, though, I imagine." Elias took a step forward. The porch boards creaked. "Get off my land," Griggs chuckled, backing toward the buggy. "Think about it. Thorne. The banknotes are coming due. Mister, Harrow bought your debt from the bank in town yesterday. He owns the paper now. You miss one payment, and he won't have to buy the land. He will just take it." He climbed into the buggy and snapped the reins. As he drove away, the dust billowed up, choking the air. Elias stood watching him go, his face gray. Lily stepped out onto the porch. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "Does he hold the debt?" Elias nodded. "Looking old. I have enough for the interest this month. But next month, if we do not sell the herd at a good price, we are finished." Lily set her jaw. "Then we will sell the herd. And until then, we save every penny. I can patch your coats instead of buying new ones. We can stretch the flour. We will not let him win." Elias. Her defiance seemed to infuse him with new strength. He looked at her, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You are a stubborn woman, Lily Harper. I learned from the best," she replied. 2 weeks later, the larder was empty. They had to go to town. The trip to Bitter Creek was tense. Elias wore his gun belt, the leather creaking softly as he drove the wagon. Lily sat beside him, scanning the horizon. When they arrived, the town seemed busier than usual. Cowboys from the northern ranges were in for the weekend, and the streets were crowded with horses and wagons. Elias dropped Lily at the general store. "I have to go to the blacksmith," he said. "Stay here. Do not wander." "I will be fine," Lily said, forcing a smile. She went into the store, keeping her head down. She bought the bare essentials: flour, salt, coffee, beans. Mister. Gable served her in silence, his eyes darting to the door as if he expected trouble to walk in. Lily hurried out, clutching her packages. She turned down the alleyway between the store and the saloon, a shortcut to where the wagon was parked. The shadows were deep there, smelling of stale beer and refuse. She was halfway down the alley when a figure stepped out from behind a stack of crates, blocking her path. "Hello, pet." The voice stopped her heart cold. It was a voice from her nightmares, smooth, arrogant, and laced with a terrifying familiarity. Lily dropped the sack of flour. It burst on the ground, sending up a white cloud. Standing before her was Calder. He was a handsome man in a cruel way, dressed in a long duster coat, a silver concho on his hat. He had been the one who managed the house in Silver City, the one who had claimed her as his property, his favorite earner. "You are a hard woman to track." "Lily," Calder said, stepping closer. His boots crunched on the gravel. "I thought you had gone to California." Imagine my surprise when a drover told me he saw a girl with a scar on her wrist working for an old cripple up in the basin. Lily stepped back, her back hitting the rough wood of the store wall. "Leave me alone, Calder. I do not belong to you." Calder laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You always did have a spirit. That is what I liked, but you do belong to me. You signed a contract, remember? Or did you forget about the money you owe for your room and board?" He lunged forward, grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron, his fingers digging into the tender flesh. Lily gasped, the old panic seizing her. For a second, she was back in that room, helpless, frozen. "You are coming back with me," Calder hissed, his face inches from hers. "I have a buyer who pays well for runaways, and you have a lot of work to do to pay off the trouble you caused me." "No!" Lily screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. She did not freeze this time. She fought. She brought her heel down hard on his instep and twisted her arm with all her might. Calder cursed, his grip slipping just enough. Lily tore free, stumbling back. She turned and ran. She ran blindly, her skirts tangling around her legs, her breath sobbing in her chest. She burst out of the alley and into the main street, nearly colliding with a horse. She did not stop until she reached the wagon. Elias was just coming out of the blacksmith's shop, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw her face, white as the spilled flour, eyes wild with terror, and he dropped the rag. "Lily, what is it? He is here," she gasped, grabbing Elias's shirt, bunching the fabric in her fists. "Calder, he is here." Elias's face went still. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold, hard look of a man who had survived the frontier wars. He looked over her shoulder, scanning the street. "Get in the wagon," he said calmly. "But he said he would drag me back." "Get in the wagon," Elias repeated. He helped her up, his movements deliberate. He untied the horses, climbed up beside her, and laid the rifle across his knees. He did not drive fast. He drove slowly down the main street, his eyes challenging every man on the boardwalk. They did not see Calder again that day, but the threat hung over them like a guillotine blade. The ride back was silent. Lily was shaking. Reaction setting in. "I have to leave," she whispered. "He will come to the ranch. He will hurt you." Elias reached over and took her hand. His grip was firm. "Grounding. You are not going anywhere. He has men. Elias, he is dangerous. So am I," Elias said. They reached the ranch at dusk. The purple shadows were stretching long across the valley. Elias did not unhitch the horses. He tied them to the rail near the house. He took Lily inside and checked the load in his Winchester. He took a box of shells from the cupboard and set them on the table. "He will come tonight," Elias said. "Men like that do not wait. They like the dark," and he was right. 2 hours after sunset, the dogs began to bark. It was a frenzied, angry barking that signaled intruders. Elias blew out the lamp. "Stay down," he told Lily. "Stay away from the windows." He went out onto the porch, the rifle held loose in his hands. The moon was a sliver, providing little light. He could hear the jingle of bits and the creak of leather. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, stopping 20 yards from the porch. One of them was Calder. Even in the dark, his silhouette was unmistakable. "Thorn!" Calder shouted. "You have something of mine. Send her out, and we will ride away." No need for an old man to die tonight. Elias leaned against the porch post. "I have got nothing of yours," he called back. "There is only free people on this land." Calder laughed. "She is a whore. Old man. She is property. Now send her out, or we burn this shack down around your ears." "You can try," Elias said. The first shot cracked through the night air before Elias had finished the sentence. A bullet slammed into the doorframe inches from Elias's head, sending splinters flying. Elias did not flinch. He raised the Winchester and fired in one fluid motion. The muzzle flash illuminated the yard for a split second. One of the riders cried out, clutching his shoulder, his horse rearing. The yard erupted into chaos. Calder and the other man returned fire, their revolvers flashing in the dark. Bullets thudded into the logs of the house. Elias dropped to one knee behind the railing, working the lever of his rifle with practiced speed. Crack, click, clack, crack. Inside, Lily was huddled on the floor, her hands over her ears. Every shot felt like it was tearing through her own body. She heard glass shattering as a window blew out. She heard Elias grunt. "Elias!" she screamed. She crawled toward the door, terror giving way to a desperate need to be with him. She would not let him die alone. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all she had. She reached the door just as the shooting stopped. Smoke drifted across the porch. In the yard, the wounded man was groaning. Calder was shouting something, trying to control his horse. "This is not over." "Thorn!" Calder yelled, his voice thick with rage. "You hear me? You cannot watch her every second. I will be back, and I will take everything." The riders turned and galloped into the darkness, the sound of their retreat fading into the vast emptiness of the plain. Elias stayed kneeling for a long moment. Then he slowly lowered the rifle. Lily pushed the door open and scrambled out. "Elias?" "I'm all right," he said, though his voice was tight. "Just a scratch." She saw blood on his cheek, a shallow cut from a flying splinter. But he was alive. He was solid. The adrenaline that had been holding them upright suddenly vanished, leaving a vacuum that sucked the air out of their lungs. Lily began to tremble. Her teeth chattered. She looked at the dark horizon where Calder had vanished. "He will come back," she whispered. "He said he would. You are hurt. The house is shot up. Elias, I cannot be the reason you lose everything. I am cursed. Everyone who tries to help me gets hurt. Rose died. Now you—" She turned to go back inside. intending to pack her bag, to run, to save him from herself. Elias dropped the rifle. He reached out and grabbed her by the shoulders, spinning her around. "Stop it," he said roughly. "He is going to kill you," Lily cried, tears spilling over. "Do you not understand? I am poison." "You are my life," Elias roared, the words tearing out of him before he could stop them. The silence that followed was absolute. The wind stopped. The coyotes were silent. Lily stared at him, her chest heaving. Elias looked at her, his chest rising and falling with the same desperate rhythm. The fear of death, the violence of the last 10 minutes, the months of denied longing. It all collided in that single moment. He looked at her tear-streaked face, her trembling mouth, and he knew he could not be noble anymore. He could not be the employer, the protector, the old man standing apart. He was a man who had almost died, and he wanted to live. Lily saw the wall break behind his eyes. She saw the hunger there, raw and terrifying and beautiful. And she realized that she didn't want to run. She wanted to be consumed. "Elias," she whispered, stepping into him. His arms went around her, crushing her to him. It was not a gentle embrace. It was fierce, desperate. His mouth found hers, hard and demanding. For Lily, it was a revelation. This was not the grasping, selfish touch of the men from her past. This was a man claiming her because he needed her, not because he owned her. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her hands in his hair, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with a ferocity that matched his own, pouring all her fear and gratitude and desire into the contact. They stumbled back into the house, the door kicking shut behind them. The darkness of the room was a sanctuary. There were no words. Words were too small for this. He lifted her, his strength surprising her, and carried her to the rug before the dying fire. When he laid her down, his hands were shaking, but not from age. He touched her face, tracing the line of her jaw, as if to confirm she was real. Lily reached up and unbuttoned his shirt, her fingers seeking the warm skin beneath. She wanted to map his scars with her lips. She wanted to erase the years between them. When they finally came together, it was not the fumbling of youth, nor the transaction of her past. It was an anchoring. It was a slow, intense burn. Elias moved with a reverence that made Lily weep, worshipping her body as if it were a holy thing. And Lily, for the first time in her life, opened herself completely. Not out of duty, but out of a fierce, driving need to give as much as she received. In the firelight, the age difference melted away. There was only the sweat-slicked skin, the tangled breath, the feeling of two broken halves finally snapping together to make a whole. It was a victory. It was a defiance of death, of Calder, of the town, of time itself. But the night could not last forever. Later, as the fire died down to embers, the reality of the world crept back in. Elias lay on his back, one arm draped over his eyes, the other holding Lily against his side. She was asleep, her breathing deep and even, her head resting on his shoulder. Elias stared up at the shadowed beams of the ceiling. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a cold pit of anxiety in his stomach. He looked at the woman sleeping in his arms. She looked so young in the dim light. What have I done? He thought. He had crossed the line. He had taken the one thing he had sworn to protect. He was an old man with a failing ranch and a target on his back, and he had just bound this young woman to his sinking ship. He had let his selfish desire override his judgment. Lily stirred, waking slowly. She felt the warmth of him, the solid beat of his heart. For a moment, she felt a pure, crystalline joy, but then she remembered Calder's voice. "I will take everything." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. She looked at Elias. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, guarded again. "Elias," she whispered. "I should not have done that," he said, his voice flat. "I took advantage. You were scared. You were not thinking—" Lily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Do not say that. Do not make this cheap." "It is not about cheap. Lily, it is about right. I am 30 years your senior. I have got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel. And now the whole town will have a reason to hunt us. They will say I am a lecherous old fool and you are—" He could not finish the sentence. Lily pulled away from him, wrapping the blanket tighter. "So, that is it? You regret it?" Elias sat up, wincing as his hip protested. "I regret putting you in danger. I regret that I cannot give you the life you deserve. A life with a young man. A future. Children. All I can give you is a fight. Lily, a fight we might not win." Lily stood up, the blanket trailing behind her like a royal train. She looked down at him, her eyes flashing in the gloom. "I chose the fight. Elias, and I chose you. Do not dare tell me what I deserve." She turned and walked to her room, closing the door with a quiet, final click. Elias remained by the dying fire, the scent of her skin still on him, listening to the wind pick up outside, a lonely, hollow sound that whispered of storms yet to come. The dawn broke over the double-bar ranch with a deceptive softness, painting the jagged ridgelines in hues of lavender and pale gold. Inside the ranch house, the light crept across the floorboards, finding Lily Harper asleep in Elias Thorne's bed. She woke slowly, the scent of cedar and tobacco filling her senses, a sharp contrast to the stale fear that had defined her mornings for so long. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the warmth and the heavy quilt tucked securely around her shoulders. Then memory washed over her. The gunfight, the fear, the firelight, and the desperate, shattering intimacy that had followed. She sat up, clutching the quilt to her chest. The other side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold. "Elias?" she called out softly. He was standing on the porch, visible through the open door, staring out at the horizon. He turned at the sound of her voice, and Lily saw the conflict etched into the deep lines of his face. He looked tired, older than he had the night before, yet there was a softness in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. "I made coffee." He came inside, moving stiffly, his bad hip clearly protesting the violence of the previous night. He poured a cup from the pot on the stove and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a fresh shock of awareness through them both. Elias pulled his hand back quickly, then hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. I hope you slept well," he muttered, looking everywhere but at her. Lily took the cup, feeling the heat radiate through the ceramic. She saw his awkwardness, the way he was trying to navigate the chasm between employer and lover, between the solitary man he had been and the vulnerable man he had become. "I slept better than I have in years," she said honestly. Elias looked up, and a shy, almost boyish smile cracked his weathered expression. "Good, that is good." They fell into a routine that was both familiar and entirely new. They ate breakfast in a silence that was no longer heavy but charged with a tender, nervous energy. When they walked out to the porch to inspect the damage from the shooting, Elias rested his hand on the small of her back, a gesture so natural and possessive that it made Lily's heart hammer against her ribs. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, looking out over the rugged hills that rolled away into the distance. But the peace was fragile, a thin sheet of glass over a roaring fire. By mid-morning, the dust on the road heralded visitors. It was not Calder returning with guns, but something more insidious. A buggy arrived, carrying Reverend Higgins and Mrs. Gable, followed by 2 men from the town council on horseback. They stopped at the gate, refusing to come closer, their postures stiff with judgment. Elias walked down the steps, his rifle held loosely in one hand, not aiming but ready. Lily stayed on the porch, her hands gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. "Reverend," Elias said, his voice flat, "to what do I owe the honor?" Reverend Higgins was a tall, gaunt man who wore his piety like a weapon. He adjusted his spectacles, looking past Elias to where Lily stood. "We have come to speak with you, Brother Thorne," the Reverend said. "There are stories circulating, ugly stories." "Go on," Elias said. "Mr. Calder was in town this morning," Higgins continued, his voice rising. "He claims that woman up there is a fugitive from decency. He claims she is a harlot who has bewitched you, and that you are harboring a criminal. He says you attacked him when he came to retrieve what was rightfully his. He lied. Elias said, "He came here with guns to kidnap a free woman. I defended my home, Mrs." Gable sniffed loudly. "Defended your home? Or defended your sin? The whole town is talking. Elias, living here with a woman of her age, of her background. It is a stain on this community. Mr. Harrow is quite concerned," one of the councilmen added, leaning forward on his saddle. "He feels that a man of your years, engaging in such instability, is a danger to the valley. He is talking about petitioning the judge to have you declared incompetent. Elias, for your own good." Elias stiffened, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Incompetent? You are risking your soul and your standing for a piece of skirt that has been worn by half the territory," the Reverend shouted, losing his composure. "Send her away. Elias, cast her out. Repent, and perhaps the town will forgive you. Keep her, and you will find no friends in Bitter Creek." Elias took a step forward, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying light. "You listen to me," he growled. "That woman has more honor in her little finger than the lot of you have in your whole congregation. She stays, and if any of you, or Harrow, or Calder, set foot on this land again to threaten her, I will not be answering with words. Now get off my property." The Reverend opened his mouth to argue, but the look on Elias's face stopped him. It was the look of a wolf backing into a corner, ready to tear out throats. The group turned their horses in the buggy, retreating in a cloud of self-righteous dust. Elias watched them go, his chest heaving. He felt a light touch on his arm. He turned to find Lily standing beside him, her face pale and streaked with tears. "You should have told them you would send me away," she whispered. Elias shook his head violently. "Never. They are going to take the ranch." "Elias," she said, her voice trembling, "Harrow will use this. He will take your land, and he will put you in a poorhouse or an asylum. And Calder will come back and kill you." "Let them try," Elias said stubbornly. "It is not about trying," Lily cried, grabbing his shirt front. "It is about winning, and you cannot win this. Not with me here. I am the anchor dragging you down. I choose the anchor," Elias shouted back, his voice cracking. "I spent 10 years drowning in an empty house. Lily, I am not going back to that. I choose you. I do not care what they say. I do not care if they take the land. As long as we are standing, we fight." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, trying to press his conviction into her bones. Lily clung to him, sobbing into his chest. But in her heart, a cold resolve was forming. He was too brave for his own good. He was blinded by love and pride. He would die before he let her go, which meant she had to be the one to let go. She had to save him from himself. That night, the silence in the house was heavy with unspoken fears. They went to bed early, exhausted by the emotional siege. Elias held her fiercely, his arm draped over her waist as if he could physically tether her to him. He fell into a deep, troubled sleep, murmuring her name in the dark. Lily lay awake, watching the moon track across the floorboards. She memorized the sound of his breathing, the warmth of his skin, the smell of him. Tears slid silently into her hair. It broke her heart to do it, but she knew that as long as she was here, he was a target. If she was gone, Calder would follow her. Harrow would lose his leverage. Elias would be left alone. Yes, but he would be alive. He would be safe. She waited until the first gray light of pre-dawn touched the window. Slowly, carefully, she slid out from under his arm. Elias stirred but did not wake. She dressed in the dark, her hands shaking as she buttoned her dress. She packed her small bundle, the few things she had arrived with. Nothing more. She would take nothing he had given her. She found a scrap of paper and the stub of a pencil in the kitchen. She wrote quickly, her tears spotting the page. "Elias, you gave me the only safety I have ever known, but I will not let my past be your grave. You deserve peace. Please do not come after me. I am going where I can disappear. Forget me. Live your life. I love you." Lily, she left the note on the table, weighed down by the coffee pot. She took one last look at the bedroom door, pressed her hand to her lips to stifle a sob, and slipped out into the cold morning air. She did not take a horse. That would be theft. She began to walk, heading south toward the gap in the hills that led to the mining roads, hoping to catch a freight wagon before the sun was high. Elias woke an hour later. He reached for her, and his hand met cold sheets. "Lily!" Panic, sharp and immediate, seized him. He sat up, ignoring the stiffness in his joints. He limped into the main room, calling her name, his voice rising in pitch. He saw the empty kitchen. He saw the paper under the coffee pot. He read it, his hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. A sound tore from his throat, a roar of pure, agonizing loss that startled the birds from the eaves. "She thinks she is saving me," he whispered to the empty room. "The foolish girl. She thinks she is saving me." He did not waste time with grief. Grief was for the dead, and she was alive. Fury took its place, fury at her. Fury at the town, fury at the world that had convinced her she was a burden. He grabbed his gun belt, buckling it with trembling fingers. He grabbed his coat and his hat. He went to the barn and saddled Bess, the mare, his movements jerky and violent. He did not care about the pain in his hip. He did not care that he was 62 and tired. He only knew that she was out there, alone, walking into the jaws of the wolves, and he would burn the whole territory down before he let her go. He picked up her trail easily at the gate, small boot prints in the dust, heading south. He put heels to the mare, pushing her into a gallop. Lily had been walking for 3 hours when she felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The sun was high now, beating down on her unprotected head. She was in a narrow canyon, a shortcut she hoped would lead her to the main road. The walls of red rock rose high on either side, creating a tunnel of heat and silence. She heard the click of a horseshoe on stone. She turned, hope flaring in her chest that it might be Elias, even though she had prayed he would not follow. But it was not Elias. Blocking the path behind her were 2 riders, and blocking the path ahead was a third. Calder sat atop a tall black gelding, smiling down at her. He looked fresh, rested, and terrifyingly pleased with himself. "I told you, pet," he said, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You can run, but you cannot hide. Not from me." Lily backed up until her shoulders hit the canyon wall. She looked for a weapon, a rock, a stick, anything. There was nothing but dust. "How?" she whispered. "I have had men watching the road since last night," Calder said, dismounting leisurely. "I knew the old man would break under pressure. I figured he would kick you out eventually. Or maybe you left to save his hide. It does not matter." He walked toward her, slapping a pair of leather riding gloves against his palm. "You have caused me a lot of trouble, Lily, a lot of expense, but you are going to work it off. Every penny." He grabbed her by the hair, jerking her head back. Lily screamed, clawing at his hand, but he was too strong. He dragged her toward the wagon that his men had brought up from the lower trail. "Tie her," Calder ordered the men, "and gag her." "I am tired of her screaming." They forced her toward the wagon, rough hands grabbing her arms. Lily kicked and bit, landing a solid blow on one man's shin, but a backhanded slap sent her reeling into the dirt. Taste of copper filled her mouth. "Get her in the wagon," Calder shouted. Then, a gunshot cracked through the canyon, echoing like thunder. The man holding Lily's left arm spun around, clutching his thigh, howling in pain. Calder spun around, drawing his revolver. At the crest of the ridge, silhouetted against the blinding sun, was Elias. He was not the broken old man they expected. He sat tall in the saddle, the Winchester shouldered, smoke drifting from the barrel. He looked like Judgment Day carved out of granite. "Let her go," Elias roared. "Kill him!" Calder screamed at his men. The canyon erupted. Bullets whined off the rocks. Elias spurred Bess, sending the mare sliding down the steep shale slope, firing as he rode. It was a reckless, suicidal charge. He was 1 man against 3, riding downhill into a crossfire. A bullet struck the mare in the chest. Bess stumbled, her front legs collapsing. Elias was thrown over her head, hitting the hard-packed earth with a bone-jarring thud. He rolled, scrambling for cover behind a cluster of boulders as the mare thrashed and died. He came up firing, his lever action working in a blur. He hit one of the hired men in the chest, dropping him instantly. But he was pinned down. Calder and the remaining man were firing from behind the wagon and a rock outcropping. Elias felt a searing heat graze his arm, tearing the sleeve and drawing blood. He gritted his teeth, ignoring it. He checked his ammunition. He was low. "Lily, stay down," he shouted, his voice hoarse. Lily was on the ground near the wagon wheels, where she had been dropped when the shooting started. She saw Elias trapped. She saw the blood on his sleeve. She saw Calder moving to flank him, a gleam of murderous triumph in his eyes. Fear vanished. In its place came a white-hot rage. They had taken her life. They had taken her dignity. And now they were going to take the only person who had ever loved her. "No," she hissed. She saw a shotgun lying near the fallen hired man, the one Elias had shot in the leg at the start. He was writhing in pain, ignoring the weapon. Lily scrambled on her hands and knees. Keeping low in the dust, she moved like a feral cat. She reached the man, grabbed the shotgun, and rolled onto her back just as the man tried to grab her ankle. She kicked him in the face, hard, her boot heel connecting with his nose. He slumped back, unconscious. She struggled to her feet, the heavy gun awkward in her hands. She had never fired a shotgun before, but she knew where to point it. "Calder!" she screamed. Calder, who had been creeping toward Elias's position, turned at the sound of his name. He saw the girl he had called a victim standing tall, her hair wild, dust coating her face, the shotgun leveled at his chest. "You?" he sneered, raising his pistol. "You do not have the gut." Lily pulled the trigger. The recoil knocked her flat onto her back, bruising her shoulder. The boom was deafening. Calder didn't finish his sentence. The buckshot caught him squarely in the chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward into the dust. He lay still, staring up at the slice of blue sky, a look of supreme shock frozen on his face. The remaining hired man, seeing his boss dead and the girl armed, threw his gun down and raised his hands. "I quit! Do not shoot! I quit!" Silence rushed back into the canyon, ringing in Lily's ears. She lay in the dirt, the shotgun smoking beside her. She gasped for air, staring at the sky. "Lily!" Elias was crawling toward her. He was dragging his bad leg, his face gray with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes were frantic. He reached her, pulling her into a sitting position, his hands checking her for wounds. "Are you hit? Did they hurt you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. I am all right," she stammered, looking at him. "You are bleeding." "It is nothing," he said. He looked over at Calder's body, then back at her. He saw the bruise forming on her cheek, the fierce light that hadn't yet faded from her eyes. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her dusty hair. He held her so tight she could barely breathe, rocking her slightly. "You foolish, stubborn woman," he choked out. "You left me. I wanted to save you." She sobbed into his coat. "You almost killed me," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Waking up to find you gone. That nearly killed me. Lily, do not ever do that again. Do you hear me? I promise," she whispered. "I promise." The sound of hoofbeats thundered from the north entrance of the canyon. Sheriff Miller and a posse of 6 men rode in, guns drawn. They pulled up short at the scene. The dead horse, the bodies, the hired man with his hands in the air, and the old rancher holding the girl in the dust. Sheriff Miller looked at Calder's body, then at Elias. "Looks like we are late," the sheriff said, holstering his gun. He was going to take her. "Sheriff," Elias said, his voice raspy but firm. "He ambushed us. I can see that," the sheriff said. He looked at Lily, seeing the shotgun near her hand, and I reckon he found out that was a mistake. The sheriff signaled his men to round up the survivor. He looked down at Elias with a newfound respect. "You look like hell. Thorne, I feel like it," Elias admitted. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way. The adrenaline was gone, and the blood loss from his arm and the shock of the fall took their toll. The world spun and went gray. "Elias!" Lily cried, catching him as he slumped. He sank back to the ground, his head in her lap. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. "Stay with me," Lily begged, pressing her hand over the wound on his arm. "Please, Elias, do not die. You said we would fight. You cannot leave me now." Elias looked up at her. Her face was the only thing he could see clearly. The dust, the tears, the love. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I am not going anywhere," he whispered, his speech slurring slightly. "I have got too much to live for now." He reached up, his rough fingers brushing her cheek. "I love you, Lily. I never thought I would say that again, but I love you. I love you." She wept, kissing his forehead, his cheeks, his lips. "I love you, Elias." The sheriff knelt beside them, calling for a canteen and bandages. Lily did not move. She sat in the dirt of the canyon floor, cradling the old rancher against the indifferent vastness of the West, a tableau of defiance and devotion. She knew the town would still talk. She knew Harrow would still come for the land. But as she looked at the man who had ridden into hell for her, she knew none of it mattered. They had survived the fire. Now, they would survive the ashes. The fever came for Elias in the deep quiet of the night, a burning heat that radiated from the infected gash on his arm and the bruising deep in his chest. For 3 days, the Double Bar Ranch existed in a state of suspended time, the world outside reduced to the square of light in the bedroom window, and the rhythmic sound of Lily Harper wringing out cool cloths in a basin of water. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind wandering through the labyrinth of his past. He called out for Sarah, his dead wife, and then, in the same breath, he called for Lily. When he woke, lucid but weak, it was always Lily's face he saw hovering above him in the dim lamplight. Her eyes were rimmed with red from lack of sleep, her hair tied back in a severe, practical knot, but her touch was the gentlest thing he had ever known. "You are still here," he rasped on the 4th morning, his voice sounding like dry leaves dragging over stone. "I told you I was not going anywhere," Lily replied, bringing a cup of water to his cracked lips. "Drink." She nursed him with a fierce, unwavering devotion. She changed his bandages, unflinching at the sight of the angry, red flesh. She spooned broth into his mouth when his hands were too shaky to hold the bowl. In the long hours of the night, when the pain in his hip and arm kept him awake, she sat in the chair beside the bed and read to him, or simply held his hand, her thumb tracing the calluses on his palm. It was in these quiet, shadowed hours that the bond between them hardened into something unbreakable. It was no longer just the desperate passion of the storm or the adrenaline of the canyon fight. It was a domestic intimacy, a weaving together of their lives. "I am a burden to you," Elias whispered one night, the self-loathing evident in his tone. "An old man who needs a nursemaid?" Lily squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. "You are the man who rode into a crossfire for me. Elias, do not ever call yourself a burden. You are my life." By the 2nd week, Elias was sitting up. By the 3rd, he was limping to the porch, leaning heavily on a cane Lily had fashioned from a piece of hickory. But as his strength returned, so did the reality of their situation. News of the shootout in the canyon had spread through Bitter Creek like wildfire. The death of Calder, a stranger to the town, but a man of obvious means, was the talk of every saloon and sewing circle. The reaction was a bitter stew of grudging respect and renewed condemnation. Some of the older men, those who remembered Elias from the early days, tipped their hats to the idea of a man defending his own against odds. They called it grit, but the whispers were louder. They called Lily cursed. They said she was a siren who brought violence wherever she went. They said Elias was a fool, an old bull led by the nose into a fight that wasn't his, all for the sake of a woman with a painted past. Mr. Harrow, the land baron, did not waste time with whispers. He used the chaos as a weapon. The letter arrived via a nervous bank clerk who refused to make eye contact. Elias read it at the kitchen table, his face turning the color of ash. "What is it?" Lily asked. "Pouring coffee. It is the bank," Elias said, tossing the paper onto the table. "Or rather, It is Harrow. He has called in the note, the full amount, principal and interest. But we have until the fall, Lily said, panic flaring in her chest. That was the agreement. The agreement was with the bank, Elias said grimly. Harrow bought the debt. The fine print says the note holder can demand full payment if the security of the collateral is threatened. He claims the gunfight proves the ranch is unstable. He wants the money in 3 weeks. Lily, 3 weeks. Or he puts the double bar on the auction block. Elias slumped in his chair, running a hand over his face. He looked suddenly frail, the fire in him dampened by the weight of the paper. Maybe it is time, he said softly. Time for what? Time to quit. Lily. He looked up at her, his eyes full of defeat. I can sell the herd for whatever I can get locally. It will not be much, but it might be enough to buy you a ticket somewhere safe, somewhere far away from Harrow and this town. I can move into a room at the boarding house. I am tired. Lily, I am so tired. Lily stared at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear for himself, but fear that he would fail her again, that he would get her killed next time. No, she said. Elias blinked. Lily? No, she repeated, her voice rising. I did not pull you out of the mud and shoot a man dead just so you could surrender to a man in a suit. This is your home, Elias. It is the land you built with Sarah. It is the land where we started this. She walked around the table and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him slightly. Do you hear me? I am not leaving, and you are not moving to a boarding house to rot. What can we do? Elias argued, gesturing at the window. The local buyers are in Harrow's pocket. They will offer pennies on the dollar. We cannot raise the money here. Then we go where the money is. Lily said. She went to the cupboard and pulled out the old, rolled-up map of the territories. She spread it out on the table, weighting the corners with salt shakers and a knife. I heard the men talking in town before the trouble started, she said, tracing a line with her finger. There is a new railhead up north, across the Badlands, at Iron Ridge. The railroad is paying top dollar for beef to feed the crews building the line west. Elias looked at the map. He knew the country she was pointing to. It was 100 miles of the roughest terrain in the territory. Alkali flats, dry washes, and razor-backed ridges. That is suicide. Lily, it is a 3-week drive for a full crew. We have 300 head of cattle, and we have us. Just us. I have a bad leg and 1 good arm. You have never driven cattle in your life. Then teach me, Lily said. She looked at him with a blaze of determination that made his heart ache. Teach me to rope. Teach me to cut a steer. I can ride. I can work. We take the herd to Iron Ridge. Elias, we get the money. We pay Harrow. And we keep our home. Elias looked at the map. Then at the woman standing before him. She was slender, her hands still bearing the faint scars of her past. But she stood like a giant. He felt a spark ignite in the cold ash of his despair. It was a mad plan. It was dangerous. It was impossible. But looking at her, he realized he would rather die on the trail trying to save their future than live safely in a town that despised them. We leave in 3 days, Elias said. The preparation was a brutal lesson in the reality of ranching. Lily did not just learn. She absorbed the work. She traded her skirts for a pair of Elias's old trousers, cut down and belted tight, and a heavy canvas coat. She tied her hair back and pulled a hat low over her eyes. For 3 days, from dawn until long after dusk, Elias drilled her. He taught her how to throw a lasso, his patience endless as she missed the fence post 100 times before finally catching it. He taught her how to cinch a saddle so it wouldn't slip on a steep grade. He taught her how to read the cattle, to see the twitch of an ear that signaled a spook, to know which cow was the leader and which was the troublemaker. It was exhausting. Lily went to bed every night with muscles that screamed in protest, her hands blistered and raw, but she never complained. She woke before him, coffee ready, her face set in a mask of grim purpose. On the morning of their departure, the sun rose blood-red over a landscape that looked less like a pasture and more like a battlefield. 300 head of cattle lowed and shifted in the holding pen. The dust hung still in the air. Elias sat on a new horse, a steady bay gelding he had traded for. He looked at Lily, who was mounted on a skittish paint pony. She looked small against the vastness of the sky, but she sat deep in the saddle, her eyes scanning the herd. "Ready?" Elias called out. "Ready," Lily shouted back. He whistled, swinging the gate open. "Let us go." The drive was not a romantic journey. It was a war against the elements. The land seemed to resent their presence. The sun beat down with a merciless, hammering weight, baking the moisture out of their bodies until their lips cracked and bled. The wind was a constant companion, carrying grit that coated their teeth and scoured their skin raw. They moved the herd slowly, 10 miles a day, navigating through a labyrinth of dry ravines and rocky slopes. Elias rode point, picking the trail, while Lily rode drag, choking on the dust kicked up by 1,200 hooves, pushing the stragglers, shouting until her voice was a rasp. At night, the temperature plummeted. They camped in the open, huddled together under a shared canvas tarp and heavy wool blankets. The coyotes sang their shivering songs in the dark, and the stars hung low and cold, indifferent witnesses to their struggle. It was in these frozen, exhausted hours that they found a new kind of intimacy. There was no energy for the passionate, frantic lovemaking of the cabin. Instead, there was the profound comfort of shared warmth. Elias would wrap his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest, his chin resting on the top of her head. "You did good today," he would whisper into her hair. "You ride better than half the men I have known. And you are the most stubborn man I have ever known," she would murmur back, interlacing her fingers with his. One afternoon, they stopped to water the herd at a rare, muddy stream that trickled through a stand of cottonwoods. The shade was a mercy. They collapsed on the bank, drinking tepid water from their canteens. Lily lay back on the grass, her hat tipped over her eyes. Elias watched her. He saw the dirt ground into the pores of her skin, the exhaustion etched around her mouth. He felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly knocked the wind out of him. He reached out and lifted the hat from her face. She opened her eyes, blinking up at him. "Come here," he said softly. He pulled her into his arms. They kissed, tasting of salt and dust, a desperate, hungry claiming. It was a kiss that acknowledged the precipice they were walking on. They were two tiny specks in a vast, hostile wilderness, fighting a battle they were likely to lose. But in that contact, his mouth on hers, her hands gripping his coat, they affirmed that they were alive. "I love you," Lily said against his lips, fierce and urgent. "I know," Elias answered. "I know." But the land did not care about their love. On the 5th day, they reached the Snake River crossing. The water was high from the mountain runoff, a churning gray ribbon of violence. "We have to swim them across," Elias shouted over the roar of the water. "Keep them moving. If they mill in the center, they will drown." They drove the cattle into the water. The beasts lowed in panic, their eyes rolling. Elias rode upstream, breaking the current for the herd, while Lily shouted and slapped her coiled rope against her chaps, driving them from the bank. It was going well until a calf, separated from its mother, was swept downstream. It bleated, its head bobbing in the frothy water, carried toward a tangle of deadfall timber. Without thinking, Lily spurred her pony. "Lily! No!" Elias screamed. She did not hear him. She plunged her horse into the deep water, the current grabbing them instantly. She fought the river, guiding the pony toward the struggling calf. She leaned far out of the saddle, water soaking her to the waist, and grabbed the calf by the tail. She managed to turn it, guiding it back toward the shallows. But the current slammed her pony against a submerged log. The horse stumbled. Lily was thrown. She hit the water and went under. The cold was a shock that stopped her heart. The river tumbled her, dark and disorienting. She clawed at the water, her heavy coat dragging her down. She broke the surface, gasping, only to be pulled under again. Then, something hard and rough hit her shoulder. "A rope! Grab it!" Elias's voice roared from the bank. She grabbed the rope with a desperate grip. The line went taut. Elias on the bank, dallied the rope around his saddle horn, and backed his horse. He dragged her through the water, hauling her up onto the muddy shore. She lay there, coughing up water, shivering violently. Elias was off his horse in a second, dropping to his knees beside her. He was pale, his hands shaking as he touched her face. "You foolish girl," he rasped, his voice thick with terror. "You could have died for a calf, a damn calf. I saved it," she chattered, her teeth clicking. "I saved it. Elias." He pulled her into his arms, rocking her, burying his face in her wet neck. "I thought I lost you. God, I thought I lost you." They did not move for a long time, the river rushing past them, a reminder of how close death always stood. The challenges did not stop. 2 days later, a hailstorm struck out of a clear blue sky. Stones the size of walnuts hammered the earth, bruising skin and panicking the cattle. The herd scattered. For hours, Elias and Lily rode through the icy bombardment, bruised and bleeding, turning the cattle back, refusing to let the herd break apart. When it was over, they were battered and blue with cold, but they had not lost a single head. But the greatest danger was not the weather. Harrow had learned of their departure. He had sent men, not to kill them, perhaps, but to ensure they never reached Iron Ridge. It was the 8th night. The moon was obscured by clouds. Elias and Lily were taking turns standing watch, rifle in hand. The cattle were restless, milling nervously. Elias was on watch. He heard the snap of a twig. Then, the distinct metallic click of a hammer being cocked. He did not hesitate. He fired into the dark. The muzzle flash lit up the night. A shout answered him, followed by the thunder of hooves. Riders were charging the herd, firing guns into the air, trying to incite a stampede. The cattle surged. The ground shook. "Lily!" Elias roared. "Get to the rocks!" He mounted his horse, riding straight toward the flank of the herd, firing his Winchester to turn the leaders. He had to turn them back into themselves, or they would run for miles and be lost in the darkness. Lily was already in the saddle. She rode alongside him, screaming at the cattle, firing her shotgun into the air. They were a 2-person army against chaos. The riders in the dark fired at them. A bullet whizzed past Elias's ear. He saw a muzzle flash from a ridge to his left. He turned his horse to engage the shooter. But as he swung the horse around, his bad leg, exhausted from days of riding and the damp cold, simply gave out. His knee buckled. Losing the stirrup, he slipped sideways, fighting for balance. But the momentum of the turning horse threw him. He hit the ground hard. His rifle flew from his hand. He scrambled to his knees, reaching for his sidearm, but pain shot through his hip, paralyzing him for a second. A rider emerged from the gloom, a dark shape bearing down on him, a pistol raised. Elias stared up at the barrel, thinking, "This is it. I am too slow." Then a horse slammed into the rider's mount from the side. Lily crashed into the gunman, her pony screaming. The impact sent the man's horse stumbling. The gunman fired wild, the bullet tearing into the dirt inches from Elias's hand. Lily did not stop. She swung the barrel of her shotgun like a club, striking the man across the shoulder. He yelled, dropping his gun, and wheeled his horse, fleeing into the darkness. "Elias!" Lily shouted, circling back. "I am here!" he yelled, dragging himself up. The other riders, seeing the stampede failing and their companion beaten, faded back into the night. Harrow's men were paid to harass, not to die. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the heavy breathing of the cattle and the wind. Elias limped toward his horse. He leaned against the animal's flank, his head bowed. He felt a crushing weight of shame. He had fallen. He had needed saving. Again, Lily dismounted and walked to him. She checked him for wounds, her hands quick and efficient. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Just my pride," he muttered bitterly. "I'm too old for this. Lily, I told you, my leg gave out. I'm a liability. I nearly got you killed because I could not stay in the saddle." Lily grabbed his coat lapels, jerking him toward her. Her face was fierce in the starlight, smeared with dust and gunpowder. "Stop it," she hissed. "Stop saying that. It is the truth," Elias shouted, pulling away. "Look at me." I am a broken-down old man. You should not be out here fighting my battles. You are the bravest man I have ever known," Lily yelled back, her voice echoing in the canyon. Elias froze. "You think bravery is about being young?" Lily demanded, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "You think it is about having good knees? Bravery is being terrified and doing it anyway. Bravery is loving someone when the whole world tells you it is wrong. You are not a liability. Elias, you are the reason I am standing here. You are the reason I am fighting." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Do not you dare tell me you are too old. Not when you look at me the way you do. Not when you hold me. You are the only man who has ever made me feel safe, and I will fight for you until my last breath. So you get back on that horse. Elias Thorne, we have cattle to move." Elias looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the absolute, unshakable belief she had in him. It shamed him, and it healed him. She did not see a cripple. She saw a partner. He reached out and took her face in his hands. He kissed her, hard and deep, a kiss that tasted of dust and survival. "You are a hard woman, Lily Harper," he whispered against her lips. "And you love me for it." She replied, "I do," he said. "God help me, I do." They did not sleep that night. They stayed awake, watching the herd, sitting back to back against a rock. The danger had passed for the moment, but the adrenaline still hummed in their blood. In the pre-dawn hour, the air cold and still, they turned to each other. There was no tent, no bed, just the hard ground and the vast sky. But the need for each other was a physical ache. They came together with an urgency that bordered on desperation. It was not gentle. It was a reclaiming of life in the face of death. Elias held her as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving world, and Lily met him with a passion that banished the cold and the fear. They made love under the fading stars, their bodies testifying to a simple truth. They were here, they were together, and they were not finished yet. When the sun rose, painting the eastern sky in streaks of violent orange, they mounted up. Elias's leg throbbed, but he sat straight in the saddle. Lily rode beside him, her shotgun across her lap. They turned the herd north, toward Iron Ridge, toward the endgame. The hardest part was behind them, or so they hoped. But ahead lay the railhead, the buyers, and the final reckoning with the world that wanted to erase them. Iron Ridge was less a town and more a scar on the earth, a chaotic sprawl of tents, freshly milled lumber, and iron rails that cut through the sagebrush like a black suture. The air tasted of coal smoke and unwashed bodies, a sharp, industrial tang that overwhelmed the scent of pine and dust. To Elias Thorne and Lily Harper, it looked like salvation. They rode in at the tail of their herd, or what was left of it. They had started with 300 head. They arrived with 240. The cattle were lean, their ribs showing through dusty hides, stripped of fat by the brutal drive across the Badlands, but they were alive, and they moved with a toughness that matched the two riders urging them forward. Elias sat slumped in his saddle, his bad leg throbbing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He looked like a man carved from dried leather, his face obscured by weeks of beard growth and a layer of grime that no amount of scrubbing would easily remove. Beside him, Lily was unrecognizable as the frightened young woman who had arrived in Bitter Creek months ago. She wore a man's duster coat, stiff with dirt, and her hat was pulled low. She rode with an easy, loose-hipped grace, her eyes constantly scanning the milling crowds of railroad workers, prospectors, and opportunists. They penned the cattle in the sprawling stockyards near the tracks, the wooden gates groaning under the weight of the herd. Elias dismounted, his boots hitting the mud with a heavy, wet sound. He nearly stumbled, but Lily was there instantly, her hand under his elbow to steady him. "We made it," she whispered, her voice raspy from dust and shouting. "We are not done yet," Elias cautioned, leaning heavily on his cane. "Now we have to deal with the sharks." The buyer for the Union Pacific was a man named Mr. Sterling. He wore a checkered suit that seemed offensively clean amidst the filth of the yards, and he chewed on a toothpick with an air of bored superiority. He walked along the fence line, eyeing Elias's cattle with a disdainful sniff. "These are gaunt," Sterling said, spitting a splinter of wood into the mud. "Look at them. They are walking skeletons. Old man, I cannot feed a work crew with bones. They are trail-hardened," Elias countered, his voice steady. "The meat is lean, but it is there, and they are here. Mr. Sterling, right now. I heard the supply train from the east is delayed. Your crews are hungry today. Not next week." Sterling paused, his eyes narrowing. He knew Elias was right. The crews were close to rioting over the rations of salt pork and hardtack. But he also saw a desperate old rancher and a girl, smelling of the trail, clearly at the end of their rope. "I will give you $12 a head," Sterling said flatly. "Take it or leave it." Elias stiffened. $12 was robbery. Even in a glutted market, these steers were worth $20. At $12, they would barely cover the debt to Harrow, leaving them nothing for winter supplies. "That is an insult," Elias said. $20. "12, Sterling repeated, turning to walk away. "And I am being generous. You are not going to drive them back, and we both know it. You will sell to me, or you will watch them starve in this pen." Elias opened his mouth to argue, but Lily stepped forward. She ducked under the fence rail and stood directly in Sterling's path. She was half his size, covered in mud, but she radiated a ferocity that made the buyer step back. "You are right. Mr. Sterling," Lily said, her voice sharp and clear. "We are not driving them back, but we are not selling them to you for $12. We will drive them 10 miles east to the grading camp." Sterling laughed. "The grading camp? They have no money?" "No," Lily corrected him. "But the foreman there, Mr. O'Malley, pays in gold dust from the side, claims his men work. And I heard his crew has been eating boiled boots for a week. If we take these steers there, we will get 25 a head. And your crew will be watching them feast while you explain why you let fresh beef walk away over a matter of $8. Sterling stopped laughing. He looked at Lily, really looked at her, seeing the steel in her spine. He looked at the cattle, then at the hungry faces of the railroad workers watching from the bunkhouses nearby. He knew that if he let this herd go and his men found out, he might find himself hanging from a telegraph pole. $18, Sterling grunted. "And that is my final offer." "22, Lily shot back instantly. "And you pay the yard fees?" Sterling glared at her, his jaw working. 20, and I pay the fees." "Done," Elias said quickly, stepping up beside Lily. They walked out of the broker's office an hour later, a heavy canvas sack in Elias's hand. It contained $4,800 in bank drafts and gold coin. It was more money than Elias had seen in 10 years. It was enough to pay Harrow, buy supplies, and still have a cushion for the winter. He looked at Lily. She was leaning against a hitching post, scraping mud off her boot with a stick. She looked tired, battered, and absolutely magnificent. "You are a dangerous woman, Lily Harper," Elias said, a grin breaking through his beard. "The grading camp? You made that up, did you not?" Lily looked up, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I might have overheard a prospector talking about O'Malley, but I have no idea if they have gold. I just knew that man was afraid of a riot more than he was afraid of paying us." Elias laughed, a sound that felt rusty in his throat. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Let us go home," he said. The ride back to Bitter Creek was a race against time. They traded their trail-weary horses for fresh mounts at a way station, pushing hard, sleeping only a few hours each night. The sense of a dread that had shadowed them on the drive north had been replaced by a frantic urgency. The deadline on the banknote was the 1st of November. By their calculations, they would arrive on the morning of the 31st of October. But as they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley of Bitter Creek, the sight that greeted them stopped their hearts. Smoke was rising from the chimney of the double-bar ranch house, which should have been empty, and gathered at the main gate, blocking the road, was a cluster of horses and a carriage. "Harrow," Elias hissed. He spurred his horse, the animal leaping forward down the rocky slope. Lily was right beside him, her shotgun in the scabbard. her face set in a grim line. They thundered down the road, dust billowing behind them, and skidded to a halt at the main gate. A group of men stood there. Mr. Harrow, looking smug in a heavy wool coat. Sheriff Miller, looking uncomfortable, and 3 of Harrow's hired hands, their hands resting near their guns. A padlock and chain had been wrapped around the gate. A sign nailed to the post read, "Property of Harrow Land Cattle Co." "Open this gate!" Elias roared, his voice cracking with rage. Harrow turned slowly, a mock expression of surprise on his face. Well, the prodigal returns. I thought you had died in the Badlands. Thorn, it would have been a kindness." "This is my land," Elias said, dismounting painfully. "And you are trespassing." "Not anymore," Harrow said smoothly, pulling a pocket watch from his vest. "The deadline was noon today. It is now. Well, it is past 2. The debt was not paid. The collateral is forfeit. The sheriff has already signed the eviction papers." "Sheriff?" Elias looked at Miller. "Is this true?" Sheriff Miller shifted his weight, looking at the ground. "It is the law. Elias, the note was due. You are not here." "We are here now," Lily shouted. Jumping down from her horse, she marched up to the gate, her eyes blazing. "And we have the money." She pointed to the saddlebags on Elias's horse. "Every penny, principal and interest. Open the gate." Harrow chuckled, a cold, oily sound. "Too late, my dear. A deadline is a deadline. You missed it. The land is mine. You can collect your personal effects from the porch, but then I expect you to be off the property by sundown. Or I will have you arrested for trespassing." Elias felt a cold darkness closing in on him. He had fought the river, the hail, the gunmen, and the miles, only to lose to a pocket watch. His hand drifted toward his gun. "No," Lily said, her voice cutting through the tension. She turned to face the sheriff. And then she turned to the small group of townspeople who had followed Harrow out of curiosity, hovering a safe distance away on the road. "Sheriff Miller," Lily said, her voice loud and ringing. "Does the law say a man can steal a ranch by hiring men to kill the owner?" Harrow's smile faltered. "Watch your tongue. Girl, tell them, Mr. Harrow," Lily continued, stepping closer to the fence. "Tell the sheriff about the men you sent to the Snake River crossing. Tell him about the men who tried to stampede our herd in the middle of the night." "That is a lie," Harrow snapped. "You are delirious, is it?" Lily challenged. "We fought them off. One of them was riding a sorrel with a white stocking on its left foreleg. I saw that same horse tied outside your office 2 weeks ago. And the man, he had a scar over his eye. He shouted orders to the others. He told them to make sure we never reached Iron Ridge." She turned back to the sheriff. "We were delayed because we were fighting for our lives against men paid by him. If we missed your deadline by 2 hours, Sheriff, it is because Mr. Harrow tried to murder us to make sure we would." The crowd murmured. Sheriff Miller looked up, his eyes narrowing. He looked at Harrow. "Is that true?" "Nathan?" the sheriff asked quietly. Harrow bristled. "Of course not. She is a hysterical woman with a checkered past. Who are you going to believe? Me or a—" "Careful," Elias said. The word was a growl, low and dangerous. He stepped up beside Lily, his hand resting on the hilt of his revolver. "You speak of her with respect, or I will forget the law entirely." The sheriff looked at Elias. He saw the exhaustion etched into the old man's face, the scars of the journey. Then he looked at Lily. He saw a woman who had ridden 1,000 miles and walked into a den of wolves to save her home. And finally, he looked at Harrow, clean, soft, and smelling of corruption. Sheriff Miller spat into the dust. He walked over to the gate. "Sheriff, what are you doing?" Harrow demanded. "I am unlocking this gate," Miller said, pulling a key from his pocket. "You cannot do that," Harrow sputtered. The law says a man has a right to pay his debts," Miller interrupted. "And if you interfered with his travel, Nathan, then that deadline is void in my book. I am the law in this valley, not your pocket watch." He snapped the padlock open and unwound the chain. The gate swung inward with a groan. Miller turned to Elias. "You have the money. Elias, Elias reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the heavy canvas sack. He walked over to Harrow and shoved it into the man's chest. Harrow grunted, stumbling back under the weight. $4,800, Elias said. Keep the change and get off my land. Harrow clutched the sack, his face turning a mottled purple. You will regret this, Miller. And you, Thorne. This isn't over. It looks over to me, the sheriff said, resting his hand on his gun belt. Now, I believe Mr. Thorne asked you to leave. Harrow looked around. He saw the hired hands backing away, sensing the tide had turned. He saw the townspeople watching, some of them hiding smiles. He realized his power, so absolute only an hour ago, had shattered against the rock of Elias and Lily's endurance. He spat on the ground, turned on his heel, and climbed into his carriage. Drive, he barked at the driver. As the carriage rattled away, followed by his sullen men, a silence fell over the gate. Elias looked at the sheriff. Thank you. Tom, Elias said softly. Do not thank me, the sheriff grunted, mounting his horse. Just try to stay out of trouble for a while. Elias, you two have caused enough excitement for one lifetime. He tipped his hat to Lily, a genuine gesture of respect, and rode back toward town. The days that followed brought a strange, quiet thaw to Bitter Creek. It wasn't a revolution. People did not suddenly become open-hearted saints, but the venom was gone. When Elias and Lily rode into town a week later to deposit the rest of their money and buy winter supplies, the atmosphere had shifted. Mr. Gable at the general store did not look through them. He greeted them. Good morning, Elias. Miss Harper, he said, wiping his hands on his apron. I heard you got a top price at Iron Ridge. That is good hearing. It was. Elias said simply, as they walked down the street. Mrs. Higgins, the preacher's wife, passed them. She stiffened instinctively, clutching her shawl. But then she paused. She looked at Lily, really looked at her, and saw not a scandal, but a woman who had stood by a man when the whole world abandoned him. Mrs. Higgins gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod before hurrying on. It was a small thing, but in a town like Bitter Creek, it was an earthquake. Later, a woman who ran the bakery stepped out as they passed. She had been one of the loudest gossips in the early days. She held out a paper-wrapped parcel, fresh sourdough. She mumbled, shoving it into Lily's hands. Thought you might need it. You look thin. Thank you, Lily said, surprised. Do not let it go stale, the woman said gruffly, retreating into her shop. They walked back to the wagon, the loaf of bread warm in Lily's hands. Elias watched her, seeing the way her shoulders relaxed, the way the hunted look had finally faded from her eyes. They respect you, Elias said quietly. They might not understand us, but they respect you. You earned that. We earned it, Lily corrected him. November settled over the ranch, bringing cold winds and the first dusting of snow. The work did not stop. Fences needed mending. The remaining cattle needed feed. But the frantic desperation was gone. The evenings were long and warm, filled with the crackle of the fire and the easy silence of two people who knew each other's souls. One evening, after supper, Elias walked out to the porch. The air was crisp, smelling of snow and sage. Lily followed him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. It is going to be a hard winter, Elias said, looking at the halo around the moon. We have plenty of wood, Lily said, leaning against the railing. And the cellar is full. Elias turned to look at her. The moonlight softened the lines of his face, making him look timeless. He felt the ache in his hip, the stiffness in his hands, but he also felt a strength he hadn't possessed in 20 years. Lily, he said. She turned, sensing the change in his tone. Yes? He took a step closer, resting his hand on the railing near hers. I am not a young man. You know that better than anyone. I cannot promise you 50 years. I cannot promise I won't be slow in the mornings, or that I won't need your help when the weather turns bad. He paused, searching for the words. I never thought I would want this again. I thought my life was over, but you woke me up. You made me want to see tomorrow. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was rough, calloused, and infinitely tender. I do not want you to just be my housekeeper, Lily, and I do not want you to be my companion. I want you to be my wife, not to make the town happy, not to fix your reputation, but because you are my partner, because when I look at you, I see the best part of myself." Lily stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. She squeezed his hand, feeling the strength of the bones beneath the skin. She thought of the fear she had lived with for so long, the belief that she was damaged goods. And then she looked at this man, this stubborn, brave, weathered man, who looked at her as if she were the sun rising. "Elias," she whispered. "People will say—" "Let them say," Elias interrupted gently. "I only care what you say." Lily smiled, a radiant expression that lit up the dark porch. "I say yes." She stepped into his arms, burying her face in his coat. "I say yes, you stubborn old fool. I say yes." They were married 3 days later. They did not go to the church in town. They stood on the porch of the ranch house, under the vast, pale dome of the winter sky. A circuit judge, passing through on his way to Helena, officiated. The only witnesses were Sheriff Miller, who had ridden out with a bottle of good whiskey as a gift, and the ranch dogs. The wind whipped Lily's hair around her face, and Elias's coat flapped in the breeze. They did not wear fine clothes. They wore their working clothes, clean and pressed. "Do you—" "Elias Thorne." "Take this woman." "I do," Elias said, his voice carrying across the valley. "And do you—" "Lily Harper." "I do," Lily said, looking straight into Elias's eyes. When Elias kissed her, it was not a chaste peck. It was a seal on a pact forged in fire and blood. The sheriff cleared his throat awkwardly, looking away, but he was smiling. Life returned to the ranch, not as a fairy tale, but as a reality. The winter was indeed hard. Snow drifted high against the barn doors. A wolf pack harassed the cattle in January, and Elias and Lily spent 3 freezing nights taking turns guarding the herd, but they did it together. There were moments of fear. When Elias caught a bad cough in February, Lily watched him with a hawk-like intensity. Terrified, the years were finally claiming their due, but his constitution was iron, and he recovered, grumbling about her fussing while secretly reveling in her care. And there were moments of pure, unadulterated joy. The final scene of their story came in the spring. The snow had melted, leaving the hills a shocking, vibrant green. The creek was running full and clear. Elias and Lily were riding the ridgeline at dusk. They paused to look down at the ranch house, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. The cattle, fat and healthy on the new grass, grazed in the valley below. Elias shifted in his saddle, groaning slightly as he stretched his back. "Getting stiff?" "Old man," Lily teased, a playful light in her eyes. Elias chuckled. "I am not as young as I used to be. Mrs. Thorne, maybe I should retire to the rocking chair and let you run the place." Lily urged her horse closer until their knees touched. She reached out and placed her hand on his thigh. "You are not allowed to retire," she said softly. "I need you." Elias looked at her. The sun was setting behind her, framing her in gold. She was beautiful. Yes, but she was so much more than that. She was his survival. She was his heart. He leaned over and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her effortlessly out of her saddle and onto his lap. The horses shifted but stood still. "Too old," he murmured, his face inches from hers. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against hers. She kissed him, slow and deep, a kiss that held the memory of the storm, the canyon, and the long, cold nights on the trail. "Never," she whispered against his lips. "Just right." They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first stars appearing in the indigo sky. 2 broken souls who had found each other in the wreckage of the world, and who had built, out of grit and love, a fortress that no time, no age, and no judgment could ever tear down. They turned their horses toward home, their hands intertwined, riding into the gathering dark without a single trace of fear. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Elias and Lily as much as we enjoyed bringing it to life. Stories of the Wild West often focus on guns and gold, but the truest battles were often fought for dignity, redemption, and love. We would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling us where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. We have many more stories of the frontier, of survival, and of the human heart waiting to be told. Share your thoughts in the comments. Did Elias and Lily make the right choice? What would you have done in their place? We read every comment and cherish your support. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.